Hi, and welcome to On the House. I'm Michael Wilt at the Texas State Affordable Housing Corporation. I'm your host for On the House today. I am delighted to be joined in studio in our new makeshift studio that we launched this year with a couple of esteemed guests. And we are going to be talking about everything legislative once again. For our regular listeners, you might have remembered that earlier in the year, we previewed the Texas legislative session as it pertained to housing issues. We had a panel on sort of the single family homeownership side of things, and then we had a panel on the multifamily rental side of things. And had our guests, had experts at the legislature and in housing preview what they thought would be the big issues coming up in session. Housing was front and center, and a lot of predictions that were made on those podcasts turned out to be true. And we have guests now returning to do a backward looking podcast at the legislative session to get a recap, digest, sort of inform our listeners on what was accomplished and what we have to look forward to going into sessions in the future, and also this special session, though there's not any sort of emphasis on housing per se. Joined by Todd Kercheval, who was one of our legislative preview guests at the beginning of the year, and we have a new guest, Brian Toney with the Dallas Housing Coalition. I'm thrilled to have them both. Todd, welcome back.
Thank you. Happy to be back.
Absolutely. And Brian, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Great to be here.
And I want to just introduce both of you all to our listeners. We've learned a little bit about you, Todd, but go ahead and just go over your background again and maybe what led you to work on housing issues and your history at the Capitol.
I started, this is about my 26th year working in and around the legislative process. I started back in the late 90s as a staffer in the Senate. I moved over to the House after a little brief stint I did with Farm Bureau to establish a program. I realized I really loved the policy side of things. And so I went and worked in the House of Representatives, kind of worked my way up to be Chief of Staff of Appropriations under Chairman Jim Pitts, and just a wonderful experience. Decided to get out and hang my shingle out. So for a long time, I was a hired gun lobbyist. It was through that I was introduced to affordable housing. It was just a client, got him out of a jam during a sunset, and then I had an opportunity to represent them going forward. And I really fell in love with the passion of affordable housing. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a home that we didn't worry about the roof over our head, but to learn about the folks that how significant the impact that has on people through the policymaking process for those folks that don't have a home over their head or even know where they're going to eat breakfast in the morning has a profound impact on how their life is going to go. And so when I had the opportunity to really kind of take that mantle up in the legislature, I did. Then had really a wonderful opportunity to become the executive director of TALFA. I still am a hired gun lobbyist, but I own a management company and we manage other organizations. And when TALFA was in need of somebody to kind of step up and run the organization, I felt like it was really a way for my passion project to take it to the next level. And so I do represent other clients, but much of my day, every day, is spent in and around the HFC world and running TALFA, which is the organization that HFCs are members of.
Sure. To decipher some of the acronym soup that we live in around here, TALFA is the Texas Association of Local Housing Finance Agencies. HFCs is shorthand for Housing Finance Corporations. Basically, local financiers of housing.
That's right.
And do you know approximately how many local HFCs there are in the state?
Oh, goodness. They're not all members of ours, but, there's, depending on how many of them are active, there are 100 or so across the state. And I think that probably would encompass some that are inactive today that have been active and a few that are not members of ours as well.
And largely on the municipal or county level?
That's exactly right. Largely on, if you'll remember 45 years ago when HFCs were created in statute, they were enacted to be created by local jurisdictions to work with those local jurisdictions to address the affordable housing needs in that local area. So an HFC, a Housing Finance Corporation, is truly a local entity from the creation to how they've been successful for so many years.
Sure. And Brian, a little bit newer to the housing scene, but talk about some of your background and what led you into this work.
Sure. I am the executive director of the Dallas Housing Coalition. We are a 2-year-old nonprofit advocacy organization based in Dallas, Texas, with over 320 members that span both for-profits, nonprofits. We do have developers, but we also have community-based organizations amongst our membership. So our strength is in our diversity. We have people who are service providers, who are in their communities from Fair Park to West Dallas, and in the north, the Jewish Family Centers and others who are faith-based organizations. As long as they care about creating and preserving attainable housing in the Dallas region for all, that's our mission, and they can be a member of our organization at no cost or commitment. And we launched, like I said, 2 years ago, around a $200 million bond campaign for attainable housing. We had got $82 million, which was the first time that Dallas had ever dedicated bond funding towards attainable housing on the local level. But we knew that there are solutions to be had at every level, local, state, and federal. So as our members have continued to give myself guidance, as our steering committee and board have been responsive to our membership, they said that we needed to get active at the state legislature. So we were, for the first time this year, communicating with our North Texas legislators about what our members were experiencing, what housing bills we thought were important during the legislative session. And thankfully, I would consider it a fairly successful session. It's not my first session working either myself. I got my start at the Dallas Regional Chamber working in education policy. And when you work in education, you see what else affects students and families, like transportation, the quality of their neighborhoods, jobs, and how their parents get to and from work. And so I moved over from working at the Regional Chamber to the Real Estate Council for 2 years under Linda McMahon. And congrats, Linda, on your Lifetime Achievement Award at the Texas Affiliation of Affordable Housing Providers Conference this week. That's what brought me down to Austin. And I learned a lot under her tutelage and the state policy on how the development process works, the members there at TREC. So I've been living and working in Dallas for 9 years, but I'm a North Texas native. I'm fully committed to helping others reach their fullest potentials, and we just have to provide opportunity for people to do that. And I think it starts at home.
That's great. It doesn't surprise me that some of your work in educational policy led you to housing issues. We see that a lot, whether it's educational outcomes, health outcomes, job skills, training, sort of quality of life outcomes. And the common nexus to them all is not only your housing, but the quality of housing and the location of housing.
Right.
All these different sort of life outcomes come back to, on a granular level, the zip code that you grew up in and sort of what the four walls and the roof surrounding you look like.
That's right.
Thank you for that perspective from both of you. We are, like I said, we're going to take some time looking back at the legislative session. But before I do that, if you're watching this on YouTube, you may notice that Brian's wearing a shirt and it says it's hard to find parking in great places.
Yep.
Brian and the Dallas Housing Coalition are apparently such big policy wonks that they celebrated a policy victory by making T-shirts, and I think it ties to parking reform. Before you go into what that does, because I do want to hear about it,
No problem.
I was mentioning this to Brian and Todd before we started. I was at this conference in Phoenix a couple years ago, and they were talking about parking reforms, and one of the speakers said he had people guess how many parking spaces they had per car in Phoenix, and the answer is 11.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're wondering why parking is a housing issue, it's because we have overparked a lot of our cities to the tune of your car can have 11 different homes across the city, yet we don't have enough housing for humans. Do you want to talk about the parking reform victory y'all heralded?
Absolutely. Real briefly, it's another local win that our city council approved by a 14-1 vote to effectively eliminate parking minimums or requirements for how much parking developers should build. For multifamily spaces, Dallas's ratios were upwards of 2 spaces per bedroom or 1 space per bedroom, when really the market's only supplying or needs to supply about 1 space per unit, because you have single car households or you have single parent households with only 1 vehicle. We don't need to be building 1 parking space for every bedroom of a multifamily apartment, or even for our single family developers that are usually providing garage or driveway parking just because that's what their buyers want. So that's what our push was. We were looking at what Austin did, and also eliminating parking minimums statewide or within the city limits of Austin. There was a bill to actually eliminate parking minimums for commercial buildings statewide by Representative Carissa Richardson, and that was House Bill 3275. It got pretty close to making out of committee, so that might be one that comes forward next year on just looking at, for commercial uses, eliminating parking minimums. So it could come up again in the next legislative session. Yogi Berra once said, I'm not going to go there. It's too crowded. Too many people go. People, like this shirt says, great places. They want to go somewhere where other people are. So that's what makes our communities great and vibrant.
Sure. And I'm sure some of the pushback on this is worried about people parking in front of homes, people overflow parking or whatever, that developers would build something without parking and just let tenants fend for themselves. But I think we all know that uh, developers are mainly just saying let us trust the market out there.
Mhm.
We don't want to be required to build X number of parking spaces if kind of our numbers show that our tenants or residents are going to occupy
Yeah.
X number of spaces. So just give us the flexibility to determine what our people are telling us, our consultants are telling us for how this needs.
Exactly.
Sure, great. Okay, so Todd, we're going to turn to you.
All right.
Like we mentioned, you represent Talfa, big membership-based organization with housing finance corporations, and just looking back at session and the sort of the priorities that you all identified. How do you think y'all fared this past session?
That's a great question. I think in reality, we went in there to stop the traveling HFCs and the abuses that they were inflicting upon the cities and the state taxpayers.
Mhm.
And though we would have done it a little different way, I think a handle was put on that. And I think we have to look at that as a positive thing for the state of Texas. I think there was some other policy issues that got wrapped up into that issue that we don't love, but it's not fully fleshed out how they'll take effect because it gives TDHC quite a bit of rulemaking authority. So for our session, it's hard to give you a how did it affect us until we kind of get through that rulemaking process. But there were some things there that I think needed to happen. For example, and I'll get in trouble from some of my members, but that's okay. Got to be honest. HFCs fell under the Open Records Act, but didn't fall under the Open Meetings Act. And the legislature felt like, hey, if these entities are going to be out there providing tax exemptions and things like that, then there should be transparency within their meetings. So that was also included in House Bill 21. And so they all now have to meet with what's commonly referred to as TOMA, the Open Meetings Act. And so I think that's a positive thing. I think that we got an opportunity to really highlight some of the great things that HFCs do. And I think that though it was out of necessity, and it was in addition to a lot of the education that we try to do, it wasn't with an ongoing process. It was under a different base. It was, hey, before you just cut this off, please understand what these HFCs actually do. And so I think the local HFCs really bore a lot of the bad action from the traveling HFCs. And that's just kind of how it worked out. And so I wouldn't say it was a great session, but I think without the advocacy of a lot of the industry, it would have been much worse than what it turned out to be.
Sure. I would be hard pressed to think of any organization that walks away from a session and says, "Oh, we got an A." You've got how many thousands and thousands of bills that can negatively or positively affect you. You're trying to lessen the impact if it's a negative one, or amplify the impact if it's a positive one. You're never going to get all of what you want. So it doesn't surprise me that you got kind of a mixed results with session, and we'll get to the traveling HFC conversation in a little bit because I do want to touch on that some more. But since that took up so much oxygen in the room, it took up a lot of your time.
Mm-hmm.
It took up a lot of the people you were working with, their time, whatever. Do you feel like that prevented you all from sort of pursuing other things that were of interest to your members this session?
No, that for our members, that was the number one issue, but it gave us an opportunity, just as every session, to Talfa in its scope is a little bit more narrow for those things that affect HFC. So we do try to help rural rental housing or TAP even on their issues. And so we were able to weigh in on some of those issues. We had great relationships. The committee this year was a little bit different because they got rid of 2 other committees and created the Intergovernmental Affairs Committee. So we had great relationships on the committee, and that allowed us to have quite a bit of input on some of the other things that came out. But I think more importantly, on some of the other things that were left in committee that never got a vote on.
Sure. Brian, you opened this by saying that you felt like it was a successful session for your members, and I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I can say that I don't have quite as many years as Todd, but definitely about 20 and half of those I've been working in housing. It hasn't always been like that.
Yeah.
We haven't, and it's not because we've had bad sessions in the past. It's just that housing was never much of a priority, and now it is. So to get involved in this work at this time, Probably good feeling for you, but I can't say it's going to last forever.
No.
But maybe give us your feedback on why you think it was a success and if there's a room for improvement for future sessions.
Sure. Yeah, there was a lot of groundwork laid in last couple sessions, I would say, by some housing advocates, but we hadn't yet had the boiling point that I think we reached as a state, where the comptroller came out and said we needed 320,000 homes across the state to help meet Texas' growing population, which is a great problem to have. And we love the business relocations. And so there are people, on both sides of the political aisle who came to the table this session and said, what are going to be some reforms or bills, ideas that would help bring housing costs down, both for renters and homeowners. And so there were, a whole package that the Dallas Housing Coalition was involved with, working with other statewide advocates, including Texans for Housing, Texans for Reasonable Solutions, Texas 2036, Texas Appleseed, the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and all those networks. By contacting their legislators saying that housing needs to be a priority this session, we worked the halls and informed our staffs and North Texas legislators about housing and how it's impacting Dallas. And we're short 39,000 multifamily homes for people making less than 50% AMI. We're short something like 16,000 single family homes for people who have enough income to buy a home, but they can't afford it because there's not one out there. So those are, the points that we were bringing up when we were meeting with our North Texas legislators. We had our first ever housing day at the Dome on May 6th, where we had people blanket the Capitol, and we took a bus of 35 people from Dallas just to come wear our T-shirts and meet and deliver our one-pagers to North Texas legislators. So it was a statewide, multi-angle approach, and I think it resonated. I can talk more about the bills as we move forward with the discussion today, but we had several that are, I think, very impactful for Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Texas Public Policy Foundation and Texas Appleseed sort of joining forces for something like this. If you were to have a Venn diagram of policy issues for these respective organizations, there's not going to be a whole lot of overlap. Sure. But housing is sort of where these two can intersect. And you see that with votes on housing bills, right? These are bipartisan bills commonly, but at the same time, you see it on the neighborhood level, right? You have opposition or support from housing from both the right, left, center, from everything. Housing is sort of an apolitical issue. I imagine as a lobbyist, it must be hard to count votes on housing bills because you never know where anybody could stand until you've had a chance to talk to them.
Well, and that's exactly right, Michael. And it's extremely difficult because there's also a different understanding. I think one of the most confusing terms out there, and I think we talked about this when I was here last time, is there's a big difference in affordable housing and housing affordability.
Right.
And housing affordability is what affects all the people that we are not as concerned with. And not that they're not, but these are not folks who are 50% under AMI. These are regular people. The cost of insurance, cost of taxes are going up, and that's creating a housing crisis, the cost of homes to purchase. And so I think that finding out what perspective that member is coming from, do they truly understand what we're talking about in affordable housing? Are they giving it the time? It was challenging this session. It was very challenging. And then there was a whole, and we'll probably get into this later on, but then there was a whole take the policy issues out and talk about the political dynamic. Where is my group of people in this chamber telling me I should go on this issue? I understand what Brian and Todd are telling us, but now where is my group supposed to be going? And so it really created some uncertainty and some challenge throughout the process.
As someone who's been around the Capitol for 26 years, have you seen housing be this front and center before?
Never. Never.
And what would you attribute that to? Sort of what the comptroller Hager was flashing the warning signs, like we're about to lose our competitive business advantage?
I think absolutely. I think that was one of the big signs. I think even going before that, it was the fact that you've got people out there that are understanding, who are out there in the trenches on the ground. We have a housing crisis on our hands. I don't have people that can live in a reasonable commutable distance to their job. And that's creating a problem for me. I think you've got people choosing, I'm not going to live an hour and a half away and try to work here because that's 3 hours round trip. And I've got, little Johnny and little Mary that I need to tend to also. So I think some of those challenges of housing affordability as it relates to that subset we're talking about, I think they've also been making some choices to say, I'm not going to keep doing this. And I think that just spurs the problem of finding people to work, finding those people that fill in the work gap that's out there.
Yeah, and it certainly helps whenever I ran across this with so many capital staffers that we talked to who were talking about how expensive it is to live in Austin. And so when you kind of have some baked in lobbyists with the staff members who are telling their boss, I can't afford to live here.
Yeah.
And then it starts to set in like, okay, wow, this is affecting
Well,
everyone.
Michael, I just want to. A lot of these folks don't understand if there's somebody listening to this podcast that says, give me a picture of somebody that lives in affordable housing, walk into the state capitol, walk into a House member's office, and look for that newest person there or the person that's been there a year or two. Their salary would meet with the affordable needs in Travis County.
Yeah.
That's who lives in affordable housing, not the picture that they may have in their head.
I'm not afraid to admit that my first job in the Texas Senate out of college paid $1,400 a month. And that was 25 years ago. But still, I was looking at $600 or $700 rent a month. So that's more than half your paycheck after taxes.
I went to work in the Senate for Senator Tom Haywood, made $23,500 a year, and thought, well, my last job was paying me $23,000 a year. Hell, I got Fulton money now. And I still couldn't pay my own rent. And I lived in a place, I'm like, it was just a wonder I didn't get killed at some point.
I remember staying at my first late night hearing till 11 or midnight or whatever. And I thought, I think I'm making $3 an hour today.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, long hours too.
Exactly. Okay, so we kind of did some level setting. Broadly speaking, we all agree legislature knocked it out of the park when it came to addressing housing issues. So let's talk about some of the things that they did. Todd, you mentioned the traveling HFCs. We'll start with that. Traveling Housing Finance Corporations. Want to make sure that we spell that out. Number one issue for your members, the main issue. These are housing finance corporations, the traveling ones. Not everybody was doing traveling HFCs, but there were some that were doing housing deals outside their jurisdiction, similar to how public facilities corporations were operating up until the session prior to this one. And so they addressed this via HB 21 by Chairman Gates in the House, and I got a way more context to the traveling HFC issue today from the TAB conference. That was very enlightening. But just tell us about what this bill accomplished, and maybe if you can help sort of explain what all the competing interests were.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have these traveling HFCs, just for the listeners. So think about you've got an HFC in one part of the state, and they're going to utilize their ability to partner with a developer and take a property off of the tax roll. Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time it's pre-existing. So it's going to be an acquisition deal. They're going to remove that from the tax roll, but where that property is located could be hundreds and hundreds of miles from where that HFC is. And so that somebody put the bug in their ear that they could do that. And I think the statute, I don't necessarily read the statute as gray, not just because they're the HFCs are my client. I got a lot of years of statute reading, and I don't read it as a gray area, but it's gray enough that they were doing it, but it became so prolific. You're talking about tens of millions of dollars, actual dollars coming off the tax roll. And so all of a sudden, these cities were realizing there's holes in our budget. And we didn't know, but I want to clear up a myth of we didn't know. It's the bad actors are the traveling HFCs and the partnerships. I'll up front say that. But the tax assessor that actually has to sign off on that probably could have done a little bit better job of informing affected city, hey, by the way, we've gotten a notice that this is coming off the tax roll.
Yeah, especially if it's $1 million.
That's exactly right. And so there was a breakdown at the local level also for communication. But the traveling HFCs, that caught the attention of some state representatives when city leaders started kind of raising hell about it, as they should. And that started the Representative Gary Gates wanted to move forward to stop the traveling HFCs. But what he was really concerned about, Talfa wanted to stop the traveling HFCs. What Representative Gates' bill tried to do and eventually did was it stopped the traveling HFCs from doing deals without any notification to the local jurisdiction. So once HB 21 was finally passed, there's a notice to the local HFC, there's a notice to the local jurisdiction, and they have to approve that. The problem was not that it was just coming off the tax rolls. These deals really didn't meet the affordability standards that traditional HFCs, local HFCs, are trying to meet. Now, affordability for local HFCs for many years has not just been rent reduction, but for the need for rent reduction, there wouldn't be HFCs. So it was rent reduction, and then the revenues off of their partnerships and come back to the HFCs, they heavily invest in local communities or then to first-time home buyer programs to try to fill in those kind of gaps. So that benefit came two different ways. Once House Bill 21 dealt with the traveling HFCs, they kind of retooled what that benefit was supposed to be and put more of it on rent reduction, creating the need not to just get rid of all the traveling HFCs that were created over the last 18 months, but forcing those traveling HFCs, I believe by January of 2026, that they have to be in compliance for affordability with the new rules. Some of them probably will. Probably many of them will have to go back into the market and become market rate developments again.
Okay, so the real world effect of HB 21 is limits the traveling HFC. You can still do one, but you'd have to have an agreement with the
That's right.
the jurisdiction that you're moving into. And then there is some. Are there deeper levels of affordability?
Deeper levels of affordability for all those traveling HFCs, but also for all HFC deals that have been done since deal number one. They now have to meet a new level of affordability. And so through an audit process, they're going to have to do that. For the existing local HFCs, it's going to, I think it has a 10-year trigger on it or a refinancer sell.
And is this sort of a tax exemption test to make sure that the benefit from the tax exemption is going to reduce rents?
That's right. And that's exactly what it is. If you're going to get the tax exemption, if you're going to utilize that, then you need to be at a certain level of affordability. And so in our problem, I want to be clear that we're not against that. We want, if you're going to exercise that amazing tool that the government has given, you need to be offering that affordability. The real problem that House Bill 21 has created is there is no opportunity to cure. A lot of that affordability is based on what your rent prices are, all of it. Rent is it's a dynamic market. It can go up and down. So a great actor, take away all the people who are intentional bad actors, a great actor could find themselves out of compliance if something in the market changes, and there's no cure period for that. If it happens in your audit, boom, that exemption is gone. And that's going to create what we're being told, and I think we're going to have to see how this plays out, is the financing world, the money world is telling us we're not going to loan money on that. We're not going to loan money on the opportunity that you could lose your exemption next year.
Sure. Do you think there'll be an opportunity to provide that sort of cure in next session?
I'm hoping so. I think that data is going to drive the conversation. And so I think where we can collect the data, I think we have to live through some rough times. I think we've got to live through a couple of years. Did it really shut the money off? That's the first and foremost thing. The effect that you said was going to happen, did it happen? And if that actually does happen, we need to go to them with that. But our local partners now who wanted to stop the traveling HFCs, who were supportive of House Bill 21, probably weren't as knowledgeable about what else was in House Bill 21 as they focus on the big shiny thing, and that was the traveling HFCs. We're going to have to make sure our local partners, whether it's Dallas or Arlington or Harris County, make sure that the legislature understands there's been a gap. We already had a big housing gap. Now that gap is getting larger, and here's why. And I feel like if we take that information to the body and show that that is a detriment to the workforce of the state of Texas, that body will act in a positive way and try to address that.
Sure. Brian, we're going to talk about the squatters bill, which I didn't follow a lot this past session. And it's not because I didn't care about it. It's just it's not one that is sort of front center on our radar screen. And to be honest, not with a lot of the organizations that I tend to work with.
Right.
It
It
I
was
did.
at the bottom of our legislative agenda too. So
I mean, I talked to the Texas Apartment Association leading into session, and
Yeah.
they said we got to deal with squatters, and
Yeah.
that was the first I had heard of it. That it was a problem for landlords. I guess that there were some tenants who were overstaying their lease or didn't have a lease or just didn't want to pay. Any X number of reasons that it was hard to move tenants out of units, and this was meant to give landlords some better enforcement.
mhm.
I don't. I hope you're going to enlighten us on how this bill ended up and some of the concessions that you all were able to accomplish from the coalition.
Yeah, my best perspective as a non-eviction lawyer myself or advocacy attorney, we did work with the Dallas Eviction Advocacy Center closely. We worked with Texas Housers to keep us abreast on Senate Bill 38. It was also House Bill 32. So those were priority bills by our Texas leadership in the legislature. And so we knew that the squatters issue, similar to the traveling HFC issue, like this is a very narrow issue that should and needed to be addressed. We believe that everybody who is staying in housing should have a lease or a right to be there, and that if you are trespassing, that is a criminal procedure. That is one avenue. But with the civil case and civil evictions, the can of worms was being opened when these bills were first introduced, and they were going to do things like allow summary judgment, allow essentially a judge to make a decision without a trial. That's something that many of us might consider not even constitutional, or a right by jury is one of our founding principles as a country. So that was one of the first things that was a flag. There wasn't it was shortening the time to pay back late rent. Texas is already pretty landlord friendly as a whole. This was definitely going to drop us down to that kind of 50th of 50 states category if we had passed the legislation as it was existed. It also looked at targeting some of the partnerships that existed between counties or municipalities and providing rental or eviction assistance to their residents who are going through an eviction. And so that was another way that at the time the authors of the bill had yet to consider like what those implications would be on the residents of Texas. And so through the process, many of those more egregious parts were removed, and what ended up passing does more directly target the squatting issue, where people are staying without a tenant or without a lease. And I believe it could have been a lot worse. It still ended up passing, and I think there were some concessions made, but overall that's what kind of the nature of our business is in Texas politics.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we're going to continue on this policy discussion. I like it. I'm going to do the same thing I did in the legislative preview, and that's going to take us back to the Senate local government hearing that we had prior to session in November of 2024. I think that hearing, more than most, really telegraphed where the legislature was going to go into this session. It turned out to be true. Like I said, we went through these as part of the legislative preview podcast, and I want to go over them again just to measure how they did. Chairman Betancourt presided over that hearing, and he opened it up by mentioning opportunities for adaptive reuse and converting office space into residential. Depending on the office space, those can be tricky conversions and cost-intensive conversions. That said, the legislature did pass SB 2477, which encourages office to residential conversions by removing some regulatory roadblocks and allowing for some faster redevelopment and housing expansion. Can we check that one off the list? Agreed? Yes.
I think so.
Okay. Well done. Check mark for the
That's something
legislature.
everybody agrees on. Is
Yeah,
there's a
exactly.
vacant office building downtown. Let's figure out how to make it into housing.
Yeah.
Not as controversial.
Second theme, which is really the dominant theme, is that almost everyone agreed that we can build our way out of this problem. That limited housing supply is a culprit for the state's housing affordability challenges. I think I was looking at some of the bills that passed, and really the ones I think that speak most obviously to this are SB 15 and SB 840. Brian, can you walk through what each of these bills did?
Yes, I would agree with you that both of these are going to open up, lots of land for housing development in the near future. So we're excited to see how many homes both these bills produce in the next few years. So starting with Senate Bill 15, Lieutenant Governor Priority Bill, removing barriers to homeownership. This was about creating starter homes again. So as you mentioned, incomes earlier with your two, beginning jobs and the staff, the legislature haven't kept up with housing costs, housing prices. Average home price in Dallas is $405,000. So you need an income of about $105,000 to qualify for that, or $130,000, and you're not going to get there. And maybe you have a two income household, or you're farther along your career to afford that home. But one of the things that are driving up housing costs is the value of land, especially in our largest Texas cities. And so if you can better utilize our land, meaning you're not requiring an acre or 7,500 square feet for a home, and instead you can reduce that lot size requirement to 1,500 square feet like Houston has done, or 2,400 square feet, you can fit 3 homes or 2 homes or more on those same parcels of land. And so for Senate Bill 15, any vacant land that's greater than 5 acres in size that hasn't been platted or planned for before, you can now use, I should say, cities are, in this case, not allowed or preempted from having a lot size requirement greater than 1,500 square feet. And so that is a huge opportunity, or they might have landed at 3,000. I think they landed at 3,000 square feet.
I think it was 2,500.
2,500? Okay. So that was part of the negotiation there.
Right.
Like Houston has the smallest without zoning. They're, unique. 2,500 square feet.
It could be 3,000 though.
Yeah.
I did not double check this before.
No worries. I should know this. But there are a lot of bills we were tracking. So it was a really successful session. And there are, for the Texas 19 largest cities, parts of southern Dallas and our urban areas that are still yet to be platted. And so we can have more homes being built that are going to be more affordable. You're starting to see some of these pop up in Austin. And, they might be $300,000 or $400,000 or less, but it's not going to be $500,000 or more, because we've kind of reimagined our approach from an architectural urban design standpoint, like how many homes can fit in. So smaller lot sizes, smaller homes equal starter homes. We have people, again, are going to be able to purchase their home for the first time. Hopefully that, weren't able to before. Senate Bill 840 is a little bit more on the commercial multifamily side. It's allowing residential and mixed-use development on commercially zoned land. So for this, we want to encourage you to think about your vacant retail center, strip mall, parking lots that aren't being utilized or they're underutilized. Those can now be redeveloped, especially along our commercial corridors, into housing or mixed-use options with a mix of homes and residential or retail, for those types of communities that are more walkable, that are more close-knit, and have the amenities that people are looking for. Maybe they also won't need to own a car, or they're going to be able to use public transit more frequently. So it all works together from a, how do we make our communities more vibrant, more thriving, more, sustainable in the long term, not just environmentally sustainable, but also from a fiscal perspective. These are going to be able to increase our tax bases without passing those taxes along to our residents through raising property tax rates. So we're excited. I think this bill alone is capable of producing tens of thousands of homes over the next few years, which is what this bill was modeled after, one in Florida. The other bill, smaller lot sizes, we've seen places like Montana, Washington, East Coast to West Coast, like start to look at these innovative housing policy solutions. And it's great to see Texas become, step up and be at the forefront of these other states across the country who are getting serious about their housing affordability challenges before it gets too late.
Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you that SB 840, while it didn't get a low bill number, it was not, quote unquote, a priority that was tabbed by Lieutenant Governor Patrick or Speaker Burrows or anyone, that it is having a seismic impact on the development community. There are so many opportunities that have been potential development opportunities that are easily identifiable as a result of SB 840, that it could, among all the bills that have been passed or that I've seen over the past several sessions, I feel like this one could have a very profound impact on the future of housing development.
And it is capped at 45 feet too. So this doesn't mean a skyscraper is going to get built.
Right. With SB 15 though, because people are sometimes they're wondering, well, how does this have an impact on affordable housing? Great, like instead in Central Austin, instead of $1 million home on one lot, we'll have 2 $500,000 homes or $600,000 homes, and then they start to say, well, who is that affordable for? And My answer is,
Yeah.
well, it's affordable to the family that can't afford the $1 million house, first of all,
Yeah.
and it's creating two households instead of $1 million household. And then the people that are buying the two $500,000 or $600,000 households, maybe they're leaving their starter home that costs $400,000 home, and then you know what, that home becomes available for a family that may be renting.
Yeah.
And then the unit they're renting now becomes available for. So it provides some lubricant for the
Right.
property ladder, right? And
Yeah.
some more flexibility for upward mobility for households, and then that has the impact of eventually affecting that
Yeah.
tenant.
People are renting longer because they can't afford to buy a home.
right.
So they're
Right.
overcrowding. And this is, like you said, almost like musical chairs. We need more housing options. We need more housing choice. And if you are concerned about homelessness and people not, being able to have a home, you should be concerned about affordable housing, because people are at risk of becoming homeless faster than we can rehouse them.
Yeah, I was reading about the rise of the YIMBY movement, and there was this housing advocate who was showing up for the zoning hearings for luxury condos. In addition to permanent supportive housing deals,
Sure.
no matter what was in front of the deliberative body when it was housing, she was advocating for all of it. And they started to question her, like, why are you here for the luxury condos? And she said, well, we need it all.
Yeah.
And because you're building luxury condos, that's going to be more inventory on the ground that gives us more consumer choice, more renter choice, more tenant choice, more homeowner choice.
Absolutely.
A pretty compelling argument. Todd, any reactions on SB 840 or SB 15, or can you identify any other ways that the legislature kind of addressed the housing supply?
No, I think they took a harder look at it this time than they've ever taken. I think let's go back to the hearing in the interim that you were talking about, Senator Betancourt, the interim hearing. I think they really laid out, I think the comptroller's report really helped them to see and start cracking this open. I think that if we walk away from this legislative session and say, well, the legislature did some good things, I think we're missing an opportunity. I think we've just now got them primed. I think we have to continue on. Listen, a $500,000 house is a problem. It's a problem, and we don't ever talk about appraisals. And so I think there is a bigger discussion to have. I think we are in a growing state. If we want to stay a growing, vibrant state, we have to continue to talk about in my opinion, one of the most important foundational parts of infrastructure, and that's housing. And I think we have some people in that body that now, both for good and bad, have their attention turned to housing, and I think we have to capitalize on that.
Can you expand on what you mean by housing as infrastructure? Because I completely agree with that assessment.
Yeah, I mean, it's, we think about water, wastewater, electricity, all that is infrastructure. And that's awesome. You think about dams and bridges. We've not thought as much about dams and bridges in the past 10 years as we have in the past 2 weeks. And all that is true for infrastructure. But now let's talk about infrastructure at the deal. If you build the Home Depot, if you want the Home Depot, you better have a place for the Home Depot employees to work and live in close proximity. And without that, if you don't have housing, you're not going to get business to come. And I think without one, you can't get the business base. I think you're missing infrastructure. People won't come with that. If there's no water and electricity, they won't come. If there's nowhere for people to live, they won't come. And so I think if viewing housing as anything other than infrastructure and crucial infrastructure, I think it's a miscategorization of it.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. It's our human infrastructure. Todd, Brian, and I were all at
Mhm.
a conference this morning at the JW Marriott Hotel in downtown Austin, and a lot of the attendees at that conference were served by a barista who probably doesn't make that much money. The hotel staff, they may have gone out the night before and watched some live music and have been had a bartender serve them drinks. All of these people that are making the city run and that are making our lives better, that aren't high wage earners,
Correct.
but that have to be in the center of the city to make the heartbeat of that city continue uninterrupted. And we have to think about where they live and to make sure that they can live comfortably and not think constantly about, how am I going to keep this roof over my head? How am I going to pay for my kids' childcare? How am I going to pay for groceries? How am I going to pay for my gas and the upkeep of my car?
Michael, that's exactly right. I don't want to pick on Austin. I don't want to pick on Nashville. I don't want to pick on some of these growing places. But I think that we have to, I go through this whole little speech thing. What's the 3 most used words in all languages? And most people think it's I love you and all
Please,
that.
thank you.
What about me?
Mhm.
What about me? That's the most popular thing. And I think these fast growth cities Their what about me is their image. Live music capital of the world. This, that, and the other. Well, that's an awesome tagline to put up, but we need to peel the onion a little bit and think about the people that are going to work to help make this the live music capital of the world. And those people, we need to be thinking about people a little bit more than image. I think that it's important that barista that served that coffee, which by the way was damn good this morning, they don't look like me. They don't sound like me. They don't have the same background as I have. But they're right here in the great state of Texas. And we owe that Texan the same benefits that us Texans have received. And that's an opportunity. And I think that's not focused on quite enough.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it any better. Appreciate that, Todd. Continuing with some of these policy themes. The next one that emerged is housing is over-regulated, primarily when it comes to zoning, land use, development restrictions, the building process in general. They had the third-party review bill last session, which was supposed to fast-track the permitting process, and thought they might build upon that this session, but they didn't pass that bill. But they did pass a couple bills that speak to this theme. We have HB 24, which I'm going to let Brian get into, and also SB 2835, which was single staircase. Thoughts on Brian, talk about these pieces of legislation, and then if you think there's more that can be done on the overregulation.
Yeah, I think both were still really important priorities, and as we're talking about the state legislators making housing a priority this year, House Bill 24 was one of the ones that actually gives some of that authority and empowers our municipalities more. It essentially looked at what's called a landowner's veto, where back in the Jim Crow era, when this law was first written, if 20% of a surrounding area property that was going through rezoning protested a rezoning, then it would trigger a supermajority of city council approval for that rezoning case. In Austin and in other parts of the state, including San Antonio and Dallas, this was used to derail affordable housing projects, a hospital campus expansion in Dallas, and it was just one or two property owners getting together and protesting these rezonings. So if we were wanting to increase the housing supply as the Dallas Housing Coalition, or have more funding and tools, that was a certain law that was being abused to prevent affordable housing and community amenities coming into fruition. And so now, thanks to the passage of House Bill 24, that threshold has gone from 20% of surrounding property owners to 60%, which we think is more democratic and more in line with the values that we uphold today as a Texas. So that was a really good bill. It also helped streamline comprehensive rezoning, which citywide, Austin tried this a couple of years ago with Code Next, was stopped with a lawsuit. This bill clarifies, I believe, some of that language, as Dallas is considering an update to its own development code in the next 2 years that will prevent similar lawsuits, or at least a legal standing for those lawsuits to stand on, because of the notification requirements and all that goes involved into our development codes and updating them. So, that was a couple reasons why that bill was particularly important to us at the Dallas Housing Coalition. We definitely wanted to see the tools like PFCs and HFCs stay in place throughout the session. But then,
in addition to the increase in the threshold for the quote unquote valid petition from the property owners from 20% to 60%, it also reduced the council vote to override that petition, right?
That's right, from a supermajority to a simple majority, I believe. So even if property owners do gather enough opposition or signatures to oppose that rezoning, the simple majority of the city council can overrule it instead of a supermajority. And all councils are different sizes throughout Texas. Some are 7, 8, some are 15, like we have in Dallas. So, it could be 4 or 8 council members that make 4 to 5 out of 8 that make a decision on whether or not a project can move forward. So that clarification will hopefully help. The supermajority would mean that you had to have 7 of those 8 council members, for example, like 83% or 75% for a rezoning to go through. And then the second bill you mentioned, 2835, with single stair. This is if you've gone to Europe or New York and you've seen, buildings with a staircase on the outside, there's one stairway or there are units on both sides, on the inside or outside of the building. This updates our building code to allow that single stair instead of having what in the current code was 2 staircase requirements. So it's more expensive and it takes up space to build that second stair. There haven't been any, fire safety life outcomes in Canada or Japan or Paris where they've done this that say they have more deaths as a result of only having one single stair. This is actually, what urban designers and architects have found. The single stair works just fine, working with the fire marshals, working with our fire departments to ensure that all stays in place. So I believe up to 5 or 6 stories now can have just one staircase. If it's taller than that, you'll still need 2 staircases. And cities can opt into this. This is another one that also gives the municipalities some more, choice in whether or not they want to opt in. Austin has led the way by opting in prior to this law's passage, but this will make it easier for other municipalities to follow suit across the state because it's now baked into the state's building code.
Yeah, and this was the first time this bill was introduced. And to get a bill passed in the first session it was introduced is a credit to the advocates working on this. A lot of them came from the design community, architects in particular. So if you're looking for volunteer lobbyists in the next session, I highly recommend finding a design professional. Todd, we talked about insurance leading into session. It's gone up. It continues to go up for homeowners. We're all dealing with it, and also multifamily property owners as well. I think we recognized back then the limitations of the legislature when it comes to regulating a private marketplace or creating an alternative, publicly created one. Is there anything that you can think of that they did to help with insurance?
I really can. I think you had a new member that kind of comes out of the insurance world, and I think he bounced around. I think he had a hard time getting a hearing. I think it's a good education for what it's like being a freshman member of the House of Representatives trying to get a hearing. I'm still, and I yield to people with far more knowledge about the industry of insurance than I have. I just don't know what the legislature can do. I think too oftentimes we ask government to do what government's not built to do. And I don't think that government was built to come in here and fix that in a free market deal. I think we've got to figure out, I think it's going to take some smart people to really look at the insurance industry and how can it be retooled. I think that where the problem's not going away. I think all the damage that happened out in west of us over the last, the 4th of July weekend and all the homes that were lost all the way up through Williamson County where we live. I think that you're going to have such large claims that you're going to see an increase across the board on some of that. And so, Michael, I think they want to. I think the legislature recognizes there's a problem, but I just don't think they know what the answer is. And we see where they created windstorm insurance for down on the coast. I don't think that it's logical that we continue to create some of these public market opportunities to go in and satisfy this. But we're going to see what they do.
Sure. We're going to go rapid fire on these next ones. We'll start with property taxes. Thoughts from either of you on how the legislature did with property tax relief, and I'll preface this by saying that they did the heavy lifting when it comes to property taxes the session prior to this, or maybe in their minds they did the heavy lifting, so it wasn't front and center this session. But was there anything meaningful on property taxes?
I think I appreciate what they're trying to do for the public by continuing to raise the homestead exemption, but I think that at some point in time, just math gets in the way of that. And on our home in Williamson County, they raised it to $100,000. They just raised the property taxes, the appraisal value up. And so I do appreciate what they're trying to do for homeowners. I think the problem's larger and more complex, and I think it's not going to go away. But I applaud them for giving it some effort and some time.
I would also argue the best way to slow down rising property values is to increase that housing supply. So there's not so much of a demand for that housing, and it drives it up. So
you're right.
That's the root cause here, I believe.
You should look at my appraisal numbers from peak August in 2021 to now, and so much of a home value in a hot market in some of these Sunbelt markets has been this sort of artificial worth of it based upon the demand.
Yeah.
And you don't really know what your house is worth until you sell it. But I know my house should not have gone up 40%, and from year 0 to like year 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And so I feel like you're right. Like the more supply, then we have a better understanding of what the true value of a home is.
Yeah. The more we keep the status quo the way it is, it's just going to
It's just gonna-
accelerate things
Right.
further.
Continue to do exactly what it's done.
Anything substantive on homelessness that you all can think of?
I don't think so. I was driving in this morning on my way to the JW Marriott, and I'm on the upper loop here in Austin, Texas. You're at the upper and lower deck, and I'm driving past, and I don't know what caught my eye, but right kind of where there's a hospital right there. I'm heading south, so I'm looking off to the right. There is it was either an old hotel or something. Doors are all open, graffitied all up. And I looked down at it and I thought, how do we have that? And I will step over 3 homeless people trying to get into the JW Marriott. So I don't think they did anything meaningful, but I think it's something that should stay on everybody's radar. And I think every municipality in the state of Texas should be focused in on how they can use existing resources and work with the business community that owns some of these different properties to address this. Our homeless population does not need to be, nor should it be looked at as a blight on this state. It should be looked at as an issue that needs attention and address this, because many of those folks who are without a home, they would like to enter back into the workforce and a real community too. But there's some assistance and some aid that goes along with that. So I think we need to really, really look at those issues. And I don't think they had time to, nor maybe necessarily know how to, because it seems like there's a statewide impact, but it's really a local issue that's got to be addressed.
Unbeknownst to Todd, he just gave a plug for our Permanent Supportive Housing Symposium in November. One of the panels for one of our breakout sessions is going to be talking exactly about what you just opined on, and that's converting some of these dilapidated motels into housing for individuals exiting homelessness. So,
we didn't
if
play
you
some
want
defense too.
Yeah.
Hopefully your symposium will help educate us on some solutions to it. We were playing defense on a bill that would have shuttered any homeless services, not even just a center, but even providing services to people within a 2.5 mile or 1 mile radius of a school, a park, some other places that would have shuttered, some of our homeless shelters. So, there was a different approach taken, and your symposium will hopefully elevate some solutions that also encourage people to look at what Dallas and Houston have done. Dallas as a city has decreased its homeless count every year for the last 4 years.
Oh.
It's an all hands on deck approach. So check out Housing Forward's work, and let's double down on those local solutions that are working, or empower them up further.
Yeah, absolutely. What you said previously is a good segue into this last policy bill, because sometimes housing issues don't affect obvious populations to us, and one of that is with college students. Places like Bryan College Station, where if you are no longer living in the dorm and you want to go live in a single family house in a predominantly single family neighborhood with 4 or 5 of your buddies, and you want to save on rent, then you'll try and get 5 or 6 people into a house and keep your rent affordable for a college student. But sometimes neighbors aren't big fans of six guys moving in next door, and so in some of these college towns they started to crack down on that. It limited the number of unrelated persons living together in a single residence. I love it when I see young activists and advocates at the Capitol. I saw a lot of them from Texas A&M, and they were all buttoned up, very polished. They had all their talking points. I was very impressed. Do you want to talk about this issue and how it was ultimately resolved at the Capitol, Brian?
Major kudos to the A&M students who were involved with that effort. They worked the bill, they worked the halls. Texas Tech got carved out in the end eventually. Dallas, Fort Worth, and I believe Austin don't have any. They now have this on the book, so it wasn't affecting them.
We used to.
Yeah.
In Austin, they called it a stealth dorms.
Right.
And so that just makes it sound
the
really
world hasn't
nefarious.
ended.
Stealth dorms.
And whenever Austin moved away from that, it's not like there were more problems that existed before. There are other, ways through code enforcement, noise violations, working with PD, educating students on how to be a responsible neighbor. I myself lived in a 5-bedroom, house in college. So I went to TCU in Fort Worth, by the way. So go Frogs. But this would have also helped Richardson and University of Texas, Dallas, Texas State, San Marcos. Hopefully, gives those students and young adults, more housing choice and access that they didn't have before, which would have, if we limited that, then they again have to figure out another housing situation where that's, instead of one house, it's two houses that they occupy or three houses. So it just trickles down, and hopefully this will, help people in the future.
Absolutely. Did we miss anything from this past session? Housing related? Anything?
I don't think so.
Yeah, next year we're going to go for accessory dwelling units for the third try. I believe, we had the bill, Senate Bill 8, the Yes in God's Backyard Bill 854
By Middleton?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, that conversation, kind of had a hiccup with the Epic development in Irving. And so that Department of Justice investigation's cleared now. Maybe we can talk about churches being able to build housing on their land by right so they can help seniors or veterans or their congregations continue to grow. So there's still some, low-hanging fruit, I would say, out there for us to keep working on and looking forward to next session.
Brian just also gave a plug for our Permanent Supportive Housing Symposium. We're having a panel on how
Panels?
how the faith-based community is leading the charge for building housing for people exiting homelessness. So excited that you all be working on the IGB bill. But before we get to next session, we've got to get through the special session that started on July 21st. Anything housing related that anybody needs to pay attention to?
I don't, there was a big push by Representative Gates to try to get housing authorities to let's go ahead and get that conversation started in the special session. Obviously, in this first special session, there was no appetite to it by the governor's office, and so we'll kind of see. But I'm guessing my prediction is that we're going to talk about congressional redistricting, flooding, and probably a little bit of hemp this special session.
And by hemp, you mean marijuana?
Yeah, THC. THC. It's I think that's what we're going to talk about, and let's hope we don't have too many special sessions. But I would like to see housing not be talked about because I think we've got a lot of work to do to establish and determine some of the outcomes from this legislative session, some of the big wins, and also some of the things that we're still waiting to draft rules on. So hopefully we don't have to talk about it in this special.
There might be a bill on like water optimization and how do we preserve our water and how that affects some of our multifamily communities. So we'll see if there's some tax credits that can be given for water sustainability and things like that. I think I saw that on the agenda.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think you're right.
A few days ago, there had been 81 bills filed, and of the 81 bills filed, 2 of them were actually on the call. So,
So you can just file whatever you want?
Just file whatever you want.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, you just file whatever you want. Doesn't mean it's going to move or get a hearing, but you can file whatever you want.
Oh, that's interesting. We got a little preview of some of the things y'all are looking for next session. Maybe some private activity bond program legislation, the YIGB bill, Yes in God's Backyard, to allow churches to build by right on land that they own, and then the accessory dwelling unit bill, which actually almost passed 2 sessions ago. It was one House vote shy of passing. I'm surprised it didn't move a whole lot this session. That would allow you to build by right a unit in your backyard. Anything else the coalition's looking at, or TALFA for that? We'll start with the coalition.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk more about parking reductions again. That bill by Carissa Richardson was close. Mentioned ADUs and the financing. So I think I'm good. Appreciate y'all.
We're going to look at the impacts of 21 to see if we can maybe clean up some of that, maybe get in some opportunities to cure on some of these things that could be out of compliance if they fall out of compliance. Obviously, look at private activity. Anything else? We all know that Representative Gates said it the other day at TALFA. He's coming after the housing authorities, and so we'll be actively engaged in that. And just to not that we're going to go carry the housing authority water, but certainly they stood by us while we were fighting some of these things this session, and we'll, as a collective group with housing, try to help them out where they are. I think, like all of these, and I said this morning, you've got a few bad actors across every line of affordable housing, but the bulk of affordable housing comes from great people trying to do a very important thing. And so we want to try to support where we can, and we'll watch what else is coming up.
Absolutely. So housing authorities could be next.
They're next.
Okay. And so kind of We started with the Public Facility Corporation, and this is all because of the tax exemption that can come with
That's
these
correct.
bodies. Right?
That's exactly right.
Okay. Good to know. Any last thoughts from either one of y'all? Would you be willing to come back before the next session and give another
course.
preview?
Absolutely.
Of
Always
course.
happy to talk housing.
Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you to you both. You all are a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate all the work that y'all do at the Capitol to represent the housing industry at large.
It's our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Michael.